The 2016 election, at least on the Republican side, has focused primarily on the subject of immigration. And since they've thrust the issue back into the national spotlight, it's important to look at why Republicans are actually up in arms over the issue. And as usual, it all comes down to money. There's big money in locking up large numbers of immigrant families, and I have Howard Nations with me now to talk about this. Howard, the Republicans insist on making this election all about this problem of immigration. And not to the extent that the Republicans want to say, but there is, a massive influx right now. It's been happening for a few years of immigrants into the United States. These are not people who are coming here, as Republicans say, to steal our jobs, to steal our food, to rape our women, or anything like that. These are people that mostly are fleeing war-torn countries at the moment. And this problem has been going on for longer than the Republicans have been talking about it. So lay it out, what the real problem is, not the Republican talking point. So what's really happening right now?
Well, the biggest single problem was the influx of immigrants that took place between October of 2013 and September of 2014, during which time 68,541 unaccompanied migrant children and 68,445 women and children entered the country, fleeing Central America specifically from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The problem was exacerbated by the Obama response to it. President Obama, in response to a lot of criticism he was getting and a lot of outcry about that, decided that he was going to take an aggressive deterrence strategy. And his goal was to deter others from coming into the country. And so his solution was that he would hold these migrants in detention facilities without the option to pay bond and return the children as soon as possible to those countries where they were being abused and literally in danger of their lives. There was a great outcry over this from human rights groups and from politicians, and the basic mistake that Obama made was he put them into detention facilities run by CCA, which the human rights organizations, the immigration attorneys, even the University of Texas faculty members got together and sent a protest in which they said that detention in this facility would cause permanent damage to the physical and the mental health of these young children. A Democrat congressional delegation visited this facility, which is in Texas, including Hoyer, who is the number 2 Democrat in the House. Steny Hoyer said this is not a family facility, this is a prison, and that many of the people that are being held there without bond and without release have met the criteria for asylum. So that's the fundamental problem that was created by the Obama position on this.
And it's important to note that, as you said, this happened between, late 2013 to about September of 2014 with this massive influx of immigrants. Again, these are people fleeing essentially war, guerrilla warfare, I guess, for the most part, and just otherwise violence in their home countries in Central America. But it happened at a time when President Obama and the Democratic Party was coming up against a very difficult midterm election, an election where the Democratic Party got hit pretty hard. And Obama, being the politician, he did have to take a hardline stance against this because, this was, he knows that Republican voters are going to come out in droves if they think that they have all these immigrants out there. That certainly does not justify this mass detention, but it helps offer a little bit of, analysis, kind of reasoning why he would do this. This typically does not seem like something we would see out of Obama, but when you put the Democratic Party up against a primary election, a midterm election, where they're already looking at losses, they have to try to take a more Republican position on things in order to try to, keep the Democratic voters and get some more of the moderate Republican voters on their side. And so now, since then, we're a year away from this mass incarceration of children, mothers, of entire families in these privately run prisons by CCA. We're starting to see these detention facilities pop up all over the southern border. New Mexico just had one pop up not too long ago, and it's specifically for detaining this current influx of detainees. So, CCA. You and I have talked about them before, possibly the worst private prison company out there in America. How in the hell did they get this contract to house tens of thousands of immigrant families?
Well, before we get to CCA, there's one additional point about Obama and CCA. The action he took was illegal. In fact, a federal judge had to issue a preliminary injunction saying that the Obama administration cannot continue locking up asylum-seeking women and children for the purpose of deterrence. They have to make a determination as to whether or not they're a flight risk or a danger to the United States. This comes from a 1997 settlement in Flores versus Meese, which was about children migrants. Minors have to be placed in custody of family or legal guardian when available, and they can be held only in the least restrictive environment possible. That opinion is right now being appealed by the Justice Department, and the Department of Homeland Security indicates that these centers at CCA will continue to operate close to the same manner. And the Obama administration also created a rocket docket to get people out as fast as they possibly could. And then he worked a deal, which was pretty smart actually, with Mexico, that they deported the people before they got here. And Mexico in 2014 deported 107,000 of those migrants and allowed only 451 to remain. But the biggest problem, as you said, was CCA. It's the South Texas Family Resource Center. Doesn't that sound nice? Sounds like a vacation spot. It's a 2,400 bed immigration center, but in fact it's a CCA prison facility. Now CCA has 32-year history of fraud and abuse. It's the largest private prison system in the country. It gets huge profits right now from imprisoning children. In 2013, they were running 65 centers with 90,000 beds in 19 states. They've been criticized and found guilty of prisoner abuse, scandals, escapes, riots, poor pay, understaffing. They've been attacked by the faith folks. They've been attacked by the criminal justice reform. They've been attacked by human rights groups, immigrant advocates, and specifically, they're attacking CCA because CCA, for example, they lost 4 contracts in 1 month in 2013. They're hired by the states generally. In this case, they were hired by Homeland Security. They're usually hired by states to run private facilities in the state. In 2013, they were fired in Idaho when a federal judge found them guilty of contempt of court because of the high rates of violence within a private prison they were running in Idaho. He found that they had chronic understaffing, and administration employees falsified 4,800 hours of work that they were paid for in 7 months. But yet the U.S. Department of Justice did not choose to prosecute them for that, even though they were being paid with federal tax dollars. The Idaho prison was known as the Gladiator School. In 1 year, they had 4 times more prisoner assaults than at Idaho's 7 other prisons combined. Isn't that amazing?
Well, another thing that's amazing, and again, you and I had mentioned this in a previous discussion, these guards and the wardens at these prisons, they do not have any legal authority at all. Most of them have absolutely no training in law enforcement whatsoever.
Right.
So when situations arise at these prisons, the guards actually have to call the real police.
Yes.
And wait for them to show up to do something about it. And that's the whole system seems very illegal, I mean, these are people who've been not in the case of the detention, but the people who've been prosecuted by the state, by the government, and then put in the hands of non-government officials. That just seems very un-American and very illegal. And especially when you start to think about what we're talking about here with the detention of children. Some infants, some as young as 6 months or younger, up to age 18, mothers and fathers and whole families that have been stuck in these facilities for months on end, unable to leave because whether the government wants to admit it or not, they've put these people in prison. I mean, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely, they've put them in prison. But to your point about them not having authority, that came to light when they had a prison riot and the CCA people had to dial 911 and call for help to come handle a prison riot. But they've been, this is serious business. What the abuse at CCA, at the Dawson State Jail in Texas, it was a site of multiple high-profile prison deaths, including a baby that was born into a prison toilet and died after staff members from CCA refused assistance to the mother. Mississippi closed CCA facilities after 3 riots and a stabbing death. Hawaii, which ships for whatever reason, they ship their prisoners to a private prison facility in Kentucky, which makes visitation a bit difficult. They took all their female prisoners out of a CCA facility in Kentucky after sexual abuse allegations were proven. And they're currently being sued for the murder of an inmate with complicity by a CCA guard. And but of course it's all profit motivation.
Right.
It's just huge profit motivation. It's unbelievable what they're getting away with.
And CCA has a very powerful lobbying arm in D.C. Obviously, that's how they keep getting these contracts with the Department of Homeland Security. And it is important to point out, these migrants that are being locked up, they have not committed a crime. Their only alleged crime is coming into the United States so that they don't get killed in their home country. As Americans, we should feel honored that these people want to come here because they know this is safe. They know that we can protect them. And instead, we're throwing them into the private sector prisons with guards who have absolutely no training, guards that are statistically more likely to allow abuse, rape, sexual assaults, all sorts of things. And these people's lives are not any better. And we're doing nothing to really help the problem. And that's what's allowed the Republicans to hijack this message that we have to do something about illegal immigration in the United States.
Well, let me tell you about the most shocking part of this. At the Dilley facility in Texas, which is a 2,400 bed facility, CCA was paid $65.9 million in the second quarter of this year. The second quarter, this comes off their own report. They were paid to imprison women and children. And think about that. That's $276 million a year to operate that one facility to house 2,400 people. That's $115,000 per person per year. They could buy each one of these people a home for that.
Yeah.
But why does this continue? And why does Idaho and Hawaii and all these other places that have had so much trouble with CCA continue to use them rather than using their own facilities, especially since it's been proven that studies have shown it's still cheaper for states to run their own facility. It's a very simple answer, and that is that CCA, with that kind of income, with that kind of money, they're a billion-dollar corporation. They can afford to buy local politicians. The Idaho Department of Corrections director asked the Board of Corrections twice to reconsider even using private contractors, saying, let's don't use them, let's do this ourselves. But they failed to do so. They said, no, you can't do it, we're going to keep using these people. And they've done it all over the country. Now, you talk about the lobbyist point. The CCA private prisons are exempt from FOIA requests because of legislation that was passed in Congress for which the CCA paid $240,000 to a lobbying firm in 2014 to make sure they remained exempt. What's interesting about that, which raises an upcoming issue, is 5 of Hillary's campaign bundlers are with that same lobbying firm that received the $240,000 from CCA. Now, Hillary's official position is she's told Telemundo in August that the feds should be closing these centers. And in a speech in Las Vegas, she said vulnerable people shouldn't spend time in big detention facilities. So the question for Hillary is going to be, will her lobbying bundlers outweigh her campaign promises? It's going to be a very interesting issue in 2016.
It is, and it always, this is politics now. It always comes back to the money. And again, Howard, thank you for telling us this story today. This is absolutely something that you're not going to hear about in the corporate-controlled media, and that's why what we do here is so important. Thank you very much for telling us this story today.
My pleasure, Farron. Thanks.